If you like what you're hearing, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks. I'd appreciate it. Chapter 11. Banquet. Urza strolled down a vacant corridor, a long scroll in one hand, a hunk of soft bread in the other. The end of the scroll dragged on the floor as he went, munching his snack. He stepped out into the main corridor just as Dorian Ildal came barreling along. They went down in a tangle, the scroll entwining around them both as they struggled to free themselves. "Be still, will you?" Urza said. "You'll tear the scroll." "Help! I've no time for this foolishness. Where's the emissary, young man?" Urza slid out of the tangle. "I haven't seen her." "I must find her. She must be told about this terrible thing." "What terrible thing?" Dorian tried to shuck the coils of parchment and untangle his leg from Urza's. "The hostages! The hostages have disappeared!" Urza shoved Dorian backward. The Chamberlain's head thumped on the floor, and when it did, the flowstone gripped his balding head and held it there. Eyes wide with shock, Dorian babbled, "You control the stone?" "In small ways," Urza replied, rising and dusting himself off. "Now, what's got you in such a panic? 6,000 people don't just disappear. Greven must have moved them." "Greven flew out in Predator this morning, and not a single hostages remain in the holding area." His words speared Urza through the heart. With his concentration rattled, his control of the flowstone evaporated. Freed, Dorian sat up and clutched Urza's leg. "I received a report from the commissary officer not 2 hours ago. He went to the stock sites to distribute food and water and discovered everyone was gone." "What about the guards?" "Gone too." Dorian began to weep. "There were large numbers of footprints leading out of the city into the caverns, but no way out of the crater there." "Do you send anyone to search?" Dorian nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Of course I did. Some came back saying the tracks led right up to the crater wall. But there's no tunnel or cave at the spot, just a blind wall. 4 men were lost during the search. I fear the death pits." "What's that?" Dorian squirmed with reluctance. "A fable, mostly. The residue of the flowstone creation process is pumped into the remote caverns and crevices. Looks like tar, but it's very poisonous. Credulous believe that death pits are the sentient. It's just a myth." "You said you feared it," Urza objected. "It's poisonous." Dorian began to tear up again. "If a single hostage dies, it'll be very bad for us." "Come," said Urza, hoisting the rotund Chamberlain to his feet. "We'll find Belby." "I've looked and looked. No one knows where she is." Urza closed his eyes, held his hands 6 inches apart. Right in front of his chest, magical energy crackled between his palms, quickly solidifying into a spinning, star-shaped object. "What's that?" asked Dorian, drying his eyes. "A ferret." Urza imparted a single mental command to his magical creation. "Find Belby." The star spun away. He grabbed the front of Dorian's robe and said, "This way! Don't lose sight of it." They followed the flying ferret through dark halls and light, and before long it became obvious where it was going. "She's in the Great Hall," Urza said, where she arrived. One of the huge doors was ajar. The spinning star hovered outside, unable to pass the powerful wards placed around the dream halls. Urza dispelled the ferret with a wave of his hand. With Dorian in tow, they entered the vast hall. Urtai's foot crunched something. The floor was littered with shiny gray shards. It wasn't flowstone, but some kind of crystal. As far as the eye could see, the concourse was peppered with the stuff. Several yards away, there was a crash, followed by a tinkle of broken bits. Urtai raced ahead and found fragments of a newly smashed globe still spinning on the mirror-black floor. "Belby?" He heard a low voice muttering, and another gray globe came crashing down a few feet away. Urtai looked up and saw a figure moving in the dim heights overhead. "Belby!" he called more loudly. "Go away. I'm busy." He frowned. What had gotten into her? "It's about the hostages. They're missing." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Come up." He cast about for a ladder, stairs, any way up. "How? You're the magician." Angrily, he went to one of the monumental pilasters that supported the glass roof. He placed his hands against the hard flowstone surface and scooped handholds formed for him. He climbed steadily, noting the handholds smoothed out after he passed them. The ceiling was very high, and it took him several minutes of climbing before he reached a sort of mezzanine made of black metal lattice, invisible from below. Here were stored all the strange devices Volrath used to explore and preserve his dreams. Belby had been going along the platform, prying out all the dream storage globes and hurling them to the floor. She sat aside the mesh ledge, her feet dangling in the open air. Urtai cautiously slipped onto the platform and tried not to look down. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "It's called cleaning house," she said. "I've been getting rid of Volrath's collection of terrors and pleasures." She held up a broken shell. In his case, it wasn't much of a difference. "Belby, the doll, Vec, and core hostages are missing." She tossed the shell into the void. "Did they escape?" "I don't know. Dorian says even the guards have vanished." "Ah, I wonder. You know something?" He leaned over and grabbed her hand. "Belby, what's going on? The safety of thousands is at stake." She looked away. "It's probably Krovax's doing." "Krovax? Is he here?" "Krovax has returned, and his powers have greatly increased. He could open a tunnel through the crater wall with a wave of his hand." "By all the colors, if he hurts those people, every member of their families will join Eladami's rebellion." "Krovax." She gripped the mesh platform on either side, each finger in a different perforation. When she said Krovax's name, she closed her hand, tearing the enormously strong metal lattice like rotten cloth. "Let's get down from here," she announced. "I can make handholds if you want to go down with me." "Too slow." She grabbed an empty dream catcher and hugged it close. "Come here, Urtai." He crept to her. She scooped him with her free arm and said, "Hold on. What are you—" Before he could finish his question, Belby slid off the platform. They plunged down, Urtai yelling all the way. Halfway to the floor, the dream catcher's wire spool tightened, slowing them. It adjusted for their extra weight and lowered them gently onto the concourse. His feet on solid ground again, Urtai said, "You could have warned me." "Candidates for Evenkosh should be bold," she said. She opened her arms, releasing Urtai and the dreamcatcher. The empty mechanism whirred and with a snap flew back to the rafters. With Dorian in tow, Belby and Urtai rushed out of the hall. She detoured through the garrison to turn out the palace guard. "Seal the citadel," she ordered to the guards. No one was to get in or out without her approval. Then she, Urtai, and Dorian piled into one of Volrath's flesh-stone walking machines. Even with extreme haste, it would still take a couple of hours to circumnavigate the crater to the point outside the stronghold the hostages' tracks had led. Deep within the sky-shroud forest lay the Eye of Korai, a flat-top mound created over a course of several centuries by the elves of the forest. Baskets of dirt and stone were brought from outside the sky-shroud and deposited in a spot located within the densest part of the swamp. Over the years, an artificial island was created, rising some 22 feet above the stagnant black waters. The flat top covered an acre and a half and was paved with thousands of carefully fitted stones brought in by hand by generations of elves. The mound was called the Eye of Korai, after the great elf chieftain who began it. Early in the rebellion, Grevenil Vak found the eye from the air, and the site was badly damaged by bombs. The eye was repaired, and a giant camouflage net was fabricated to cover the mound. Woven of living vines, the net blended in with the natural tree canopy, hiding the elves' sacred assembly site. It was at the Eye of Korai that the elf tribes gathered to celebrate their most solemn ceremonies, to honor their dead, who were buried in tomb chambers deep in the mound, and to consult each other on other important issues. It was only natural the Eye was chosen as the place Eladamri and his allies were to meet the most revered holy figure on Rath, the Oracle and Vak. No one knew her real name. She was incredibly old, far older than Matriarch Tantjova or any of her sisters. It was rumored the Oracle dwelt on other planes and could see not only the future of this world, but the future of other worlds as well. No one saw her arrive. Eladamri and his people went to bed one night after their arrival and awoke the next day to find a strange pavilion had appeared in the exact center of the eye. The pavilion resembled a Vex nomad's tent, conical roof, sloping walls, but was larger and changed color constantly as light and shadow played over it. There was no obvious entrance. Eladamri was amused when Darset walked around and around the pavilion looking for a door and finding none. "The blasted trick!" Darset growled. "Of course," Eldamari said. "What better way to preserve your privacy, live in a house without a door?" Tantjova and her young female bodyguards joined Dal and the elf. She leaned on the arm of one of her proud granddaughters, the warrior Lyn Civi. "Lady, how do we speak to this oracle of yours?" Darset finally asked. Tantjova answered, "You can, oh Darset. When the oracle has something to say, she will call you." They lingered by the mysterious pavilion for some time, half hoping to be summoned into the presence of the famed oracle. When minutes turned into hours, Darset grew irritated and left. Eladamri likewise had pressing matters to attend to and took his leave. Only Tantjova remained. Civi found a folding stool for her grandmother to sit on and stayed with her. After his defeat of Krovax, Eladamri sent runners to every district bearing the news. As he hoped, new recruits trickled in, wanting to fight the disarrayed government forces. He established a number of recruiting camps on the fringes of the forest. There, trusted lieutenants weeded out the treacherous and the lazy from the stream of volunteers. Those who showed commitment, staying power, would be taken deep into the Sky Shroud and begin training for war. Daylight was failing when Eladamri and Darset were alerted by Tantjova that a door to the Oracle's tent had appeared. The three allied leaders stood side by side outside the pavilion, gazing at the fluttering canvas opening. The Oracle's tent was haloed by a faint greenish glow. This troubled the Vak matriarch. "It's a bad sign," said Tantjova. "How so?" asked Darset. "To my people, green is a color of ill omen." "Among mine, it's a good sign," Eladamri said tearfully. "Green is the color of our ancient trees. Perhaps she wears this aura to honor me." Tantjova did not look convinced. "Suppose we should go in?" Darset murmured. Eladamri nodded and took the lead. Darset followed, and a worried-looking Tantjova brought up the rear. Entering the tent was like walking into a fog bank. Every visible feature, including the entrance, disappeared once they were inside. The faintly greenish mist smelled strongly of incense and rare spices. The odors were strong enough to make Eladamri's head swim. He kept going straight ahead, at least he assumed he was, for several yards, which didn't make sense. The pavilion was no more than 15 feet across, as seen from the outside. Was he walking in some kind of dazed circle?
"Seeker, come. You are welcome,"
said a sourceless voice. "Where are you?" said Eladamri.
"Here. All around you."
He fumed a little. Why were these mystical types always so obscure? "I want to speak with you, face to face," called out. No sooner had he said so than a dark outline appeared in the midst. Eladamri approached cautiously. The silhouette resolved into a seated Vek woman, dressed in nomadic robes densely patterned with green and brown embroidered swirls. She sat at a tall bowl-shaped table filled with a silver liquid. Her face was averted. Her arms gripped the bowl on either side. "You the Oracle in Vek?" asked Eladamri.
"I'd hoped your first question would be more intelligent."
Startled by her impudence, the elf leader replied, "What is this? You admit me to snipe at my wits?"
"Peace, oh Eldamri. take no offense at my free time. When past, present, and future exist in your mind at the same time, it's difficult to spare enough thought for matters.
She raised her head. Eladamri had heard the oracle was an aged crone, but the face he saw was as fresh as an open lily. He took her to be no more than 15 years old.
I'm much older than that.
Said the oracle.
What you see is an illusion I will you to see.
You read minds?
When they're simple enough, I peer behind the thinker's eyes and read his words before they fall on his lips.
More insults? Why, my hero, oracle? She blew on the surface of the bowl, and the silver liquid rippled to the edge and back.
Your cause is just, O Eldamri, and your triumphs genuine. The final victory is beyond your grasp.
All things are possible with God's help, he said. You telling me the rebellion is doomed?
It will never succeed on Rath.
He didn't want to believe it. For all his invocation of the gods, Eladamri was a realist, believing first and foremost in Eladamri. It rankled him for this ancient oracle, this freak, to tell him flatly his cause was hopeless.
Not hopeless.
She said.
You will defeat your enemies one day, Elf Lord, and be hailed as the savior of a world not your own.
Enough vagaries, he said. Tell me something useful. What is Krovax doing at this moment? She pursed her brown lips and blew again over the silver pool. Though Eladamri could see nothing in it, the oracle peered closely at the bowl. She shuddered violently and struck the fluid mirror with the palm of her hand.
Oh. Oh.
Was all the oracle could say. What is it?
Terrible. I cannot.
What?
Blood. And more blood. He feasts on their lives. Abomination.
Eladamri leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of the bowl. He thrust his face close to the oracle's and for an instant caught a glimpse of her true visage, deeply wrinkled skin the color of mud, sunken eyes, a nose little more than 2 holes in her face. He blinked, and the impression was gone. The dewy-eyed girl was back. Speak plainly, he urged. I must know Krovax is doing.
I cannot speak it.
She whispered. He turned away in disgust. This is useless. Can you tell me nothing of value?
2 things, O Eldamri. Your destiny lies in the stronghold, not in the forest or on the plain. A door will be offered to you, and you must enter. To do otherwise, to do all you cherish.
The stronghold? Should I attack there before a new Evankar is chosen? Is that what you're telling me? The oracle sagged in her chair, covering her face with her hands.
No. No attack on the stronghold will succeed. It will fall to the quietest of all. No man, no elf. You must go there in chains, O Eldamri. Go in chains. Go in chains. The dead one will open a door for you, and you must go.
I don't understand. Will I be captured? Is that what you mean? The mist thickened between them. He tried to reach through and take hold of the oracle, but it was like seizing a shadow. Where will this door take me? He cried. Her reply was a fast, fading whisper.
To a land of light and color. Go there. Go to the Korvac door.
The mist disappeared, and Eladamri found himself standing in the open top the Eye of Korai. The oracle's tent was gone. Darset and Tant Jova were a few feet away, their eyes closed. Eladamri shook off the after effects of the oracle's intense illusions and called to his friends. Both awoke at the same time. He's gone, said Darset. Is she ever here? Eladamri asked, even though he knew the answer. I heard everything, Tant Jova said. Her prophecies and her proclaiming you the Korvac doll. I heard it too, but I couldn't see her speak, Darset said, puzzled. Yes, Tant Jova said. The word must be shouted in every village and every tent. Eladamri is the promised one. Eladamri is the Korvac doll. Rebels on the mound gathered quickly when they heard the Vec matriarch shout. They took up the refrain, "The promised one! The Korvac doll!" and shouted it as loudly as they could over and over. Lynn Civi and Gallon raised Eladamri on their shoulders. Despite his misgivings about the Oracle's murky predictions, Eladamri was vastly relieved. All his life he had dreamt of this moment. So much had been sacrificed, not least by him, his wife, his only child, a safe and normal life, all lost to the dark forces of the stronghold. Now the final fight could begin. He would be the Korvac doll, no matter what gloomy and ambiguous prophecies the Oracle and Vac made. They carried Eladamri around the perimeter of the Eye, shouting and singing war songs. They were about to start a second circuit when 4 weary, bleeding elves appeared at the edge of the mound. The triumphant parade abruptly ceased, and Eladamri was set back on his feet. He greeted the harried new arrivals. "I know you, brother," he said to the eldest elf in the group. "You're Radon, Mossbridge Village?" "I am. Health to you, brother." Radon had a number of sizable sword cuts on his arms and visible blade marks on his breastplate. "My nephews and I are all that's left of a band 40 strong. We're on our way here to join you, Eladamri, and we were attacked by the Evankar's flying ship." Alarm ricocheted through the crowd. "What?" said Darset. "Predator flies again?" "It does. Oh, its twin," said the weary Radon. "We took a shortcut across the plain from Mossbridge. The devils fell upon us without warning." "You have hand weapon injuries?" Eladamri said. "How did that happen?" "It was their method, brother," said the elf. "They did not rain fire and arrows on us as in the past. The flying ship alighted, and 100 soldiers came out. Grevenil Vec led them." Mention of the Rathi warlord provoked fresh outcries for vengeance. Eladamri quieted his friends and allies. "This changes much," he said. "I had hoped to forge an open army to meet the stronghold soldiers in open combat, but we dare not expose ourselves to destruction from the air." "What can we do?" asked Gallon. Eladamri pondered for a moment. "We must go on," he said. "We'll go back to the old ways, ambush, hit the enemy and run, steal their weapons, and bide our time as our strength grows." "Can't win by ambushing outposts," said Darset. "It's that flying ship," Tanjova said, striking the ground with her staff. "Without it, the stronghold would collapse like a rotten cask." The allies fell into arguing strategy. Voices rose as they disagreed how to fight under the threat of aerial attack. Gallon turned to Eladamri. "It's our best course of action, brother. Destroy that flying ship." "Make it sound easy," Darset said sourly. "It won't be easy," Eladamri answered, "but it must be done." "But how? Predator roots inside the stronghold," Gallon objected. "Yes," Darset snorted. "You proposing we storm the stronghold just to destroy the flying ship?" "Not storm," Darset. "Just pay a little visit. A few friends and I." Tanjova looked stunned. "You're not going to raid the stronghold, oh, Eladamri!" "No," he said. "I'm going to give myself up." It would have been faster to seek Krovax by air, but Greven had taken Predator to find the Sky Shroud Expeditionary Force, so they were forced to rely on one of Volrath's old two-legged walkers. The Headless Turkey, as Urtai called it, lumbered across the undulating landscape below the crater. The walker made slow progress over the uneven terrain. Opposite the stronghold's main causeway, the plain was level and covered with knee-high yellow grass. As the turkey climbed out of the shallow gully, Belby's acute eyes spotted a smudge in the horizon. A crowd of people. "Faster," she said. Volrath's old machine covered the flat ground at an admirable clip, each sweep of the metal-toed feet tearing up a dusty divot. Urtai was at the controls, which consisted of two levers, one each for the right and left leg. He had them shoved forward as far as they would go, maximum speed. Belby stood on the front of the car, hand to her brow, scanning ahead for obstacles. Bouncing in the back was Dorian, gripping the sides of the walker with white-knuckled hands. When they were still a mile away from the evident crowd, Belby stiffened and signaled for Urtai to slow down. He hauled back on the levers, bringing the turkey from a gallop to a lazy lope. "What do you see?" asked Dorian. "People," she replied, puzzled. "They seem to be floating above the ground." A far-off shriek reached out to them, a thin wail of pure terror and utmost anguish. Urtai dropped his hands and the walker stopped. "He's not. He is." Belby vaulted over the side. It was 8 feet to the ground, but she landed lightly on her toes and took off running. Urtai shoved the controls forward, sending the walker pounding after the fleet emissary. Belby covered the last 800 yards in seconds. What she thought were people floating was not that at all. Ahead, the plain was thickly studded with sharp poles, formed from the flowstone substrate under the thin layer of topsoil. Impaled on the poles were the hostages, thousands of them. Belby stopped, frozen in her tracks by the scene before her. Krovax had commanded the spikes to thrust out of the ground, impaling the victims where they stood. Some died immediately, others took their time to find death, and a few still clung to life. Their moans were like a swirling wind coming from every direction at once. She didn't hear the walker thump to a halt behind her. It squatted and Urtai got out. Dorian couldn't. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Next thing Belby knew, Urtai's hand was on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. "How could he do this?" Urtai whispered. "His power over Flowstone is developing exponentially," Belby said. "He's learned to fix the forms into permanent shapes. Impressive." "Impressive? How can you say this savage is impressive?" Urtai took a step back, a horrified look on his face. Slowly, Belby walked into the forest of death. Most of the poles were 8 to 10 feet high, tall enough that the victim's feet couldn't reach the ground. The gray metal spikes were black with gore, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood. Urtai tried to follow Belby, but within a few yards he broke down, nauseated. Dazed, Belby wound her way through the maze of spikes. Since they'd sprung up wherever a person had been standing, there was no order, no pattern for their placement. Where a family huddled together for safety, a spike for each of them had erupted. Standing alone was no safer. Many victims looked as though they were caught in mid-stride. Age and gender made no difference. All had fallen to Krovax's insatiable vengeance. A scream came from close by. Numbly, Belby turned toward the sound. She saw a band of Mogs manhandling a doll man. Without thinking, she hurled herself at them, lashing out at the loathsome gremlins with her fists and feet. Bewildered, the Mogs let their prey go and fled, whooping. Belby tried to help the man stand, but as he was crazed with fear and kept trying to crawl away on all fours. "It's all right. It's all right," Belby said over and over. The man, mired in gore, looked up at her and started to speak. His words were cut short by a spike bursting from the ground beneath him. It thrust up so powerfully that the man was carried 4 feet in the air before Belby could even react. She grasped the still-growing post and tried to break it, but even her considerable strength couldn't affect the metal pole 8 feet tall and now almost 7 inches thick. Blood cascaded down the pole over Belby's hands. Trembling, she backed away and screamed. Urtai heard her cry. Sick and shaken, he ran to her, calling her name. He dodged around a cluster of thick spikes, and they fell into each other's arms. Belby was bathed in gore up to her elbows, and a thick spray of blood that at some point struck her in the face. "Belby! Belby!" he shouted, shaking her by the shoulders. He raised a hand to strike her, but with her lightning reflexes, she caught his hand long before it connected. "Hit me, and I'll kill you," she cried. To emphasize her point, she squeezed his hand. Urtai bent his legs to relieve the pressure on his hand, and Belby forced him to his knees. Don't hurt me, he said. Haven't enough people been hurt today? Suddenly shamed, she released him. Krovax. I must find Krovax. Blood and dust made a dense brown mud that clung to Urtai's knees. I'll go with you. They wandered through what seemed like an endless field of carnage. Urtai kept his eyes on the ground, but Belby gazed wide-eyed at every horror. The sights and smells of death assaulted her at every turn. The relentlessly analytical mind given to her by the Phyrexian masters made her catalog each victim as she passed. Male, dull, estimated age 60, impaled through the chest. Male, Vec, estimated age 72, impaled through thigh, abdomen, armpit. Female, Vec, estimated age 11, impaled through foot, thigh, and head. Female, dull, estimated age 44, impaled through abdomen. Female, dull, 28, impaled. Male, Vec, 6, female, core, female, mate. Urtai was clutching her hand. She ceased her macabre catalog and said, Do you still want the job? How can I defeat a man who does like this? He said. How can you allow a monster like him to rule this entire world? I must choose the best candidate for Evankar, Belby said faintly. I exist to make this choice. Belby heard voices ahead. Urtai dropped her hand and went on. Belby followed, methodically counting the dead. At the epicenter of the death field was a clear space 20 yards wide. In the midst of the clearing sat Krovax at a long rectangular table, covered in a spotless white tablecloth. His back was to them. Assorted Mogs, armed with axes and clubs, stood idle around the edge of the clearing. Others, in weirdly comic livery, fancy velvet uniforms and wigs, bore silver truncheons laden with food to the table. Welcome,
Excellency.
Krovax said, keeping his back turned.
Is my rival, young Urtai, with you?
Bastard! Urtai spat, starting forward. Belby restrained him. Are we having lunch? She said. Some coolness had returned to her voice. The sight of Krovax gave needed focus to her outraged senses.
A light repast. It's been a busy morning. Please, join me.
Urtai's face purpled, but Belby cautioned him with a glance. I do not eat. Thank you, she said. She motioned Urtai to follow her. They circled to the end of the table Krovax had raised from the ground. Two high-backed chairs bubbled up and solidified across from Krovax. Belby slid gracefully into one chair. Urtai fell heavily into the other. It was an extraordinary scene. Krovax has discarded his customary black garb and was clad instead in all white. Bloodless, sterile white, without a speck of gore or dirt on him. A white mantle edged in gold draped across his shoulders, and on his head he wore a plain circlet wrought in gold and white enamel. He'd cut off his long pigtail at neck length and let his hair hang loosely. Had he not been backed by a panorama of violent death, Krovax would have been the epitome of a peaceful, civilized monarch.
Wine?
He said. A Mog in an ill-fitting white cravat hopped to Belby's elbow and held out a silver urn.
It's one of Volrath's vintages. He drank it for pleasure, I'm told.
Belby said nothing, so the Mog filled the heavy crystal goblet by her plate. The wine was brilliantly scarlet and smelled faintly of flowers.
Give some to the boy, too. I assume he can drink.
Krovax said. The Mog waddled to Urtai. Why have you done this? Belby said. Why slaughter these innocent people?
You surprise me, Excellency. Did the overlords teach you that the most valuable tool of rulership is fear? This small exercise will ensure the loyalty, or at least the compliance, of the civil population during the coming campaign against Eladamri.
Small exercise? Urtai shouted, his goblet overturned, spilling bright red wine over the snowy tablecloth. Before it lapped the undersides of the heavy silver dishes, the scarlet liquid vanished, as did Urtai's cup.
No more wine for you,
Krovax said. 5,868 killed hardly qualifies as a small exercise, Belby said.
It's more than 1,000,
he said, tweaking her for her lie.
But they were expendable. Dorian chose only the old and weak.
You're a monster, Urtai said flatly. Krovax sawed off a bit of rare cutlet and forked it into his mouth.
This from the boy who would be Evankar. I'm told the hostage idea was yours.
No one was supposed to get hurt.
You're sentimental, Urtai.
Krovax said.
There's no room for sentiment on Rath.
What you call sentiment, I call prudence, Belby said. She could see her reflection in the empty silver plate before her. The wild, blood-smeared face could hardly be hers. Your actions are precipitate, Krovax. There's no evidence the people of the Stronghold intended to rise in rebellion against us. It is you who've given them common cause with Eladamri by murdering their families.
With all respect, Excellency, you don't know what you're talking about. I was with the army when we were ambushed by the rebels. There were Dahl and Vac warriors with the Sky Shroud elves.
So you avenge your defeat on helpless old people and children? Said Urtai.
Yes,
He sipped wine.
as Evankar, I will brook no resistance to my rule. The only law of the realm shall be obey or die.
You're not Evankar yet, Belby said. Krovax slammed down his goblet, snapping the stem.
Then declare me so. Now!
There are other factors to consider.
What? Him?
Krovax whipped a knife off the table and thrust it at Urtai.
I can kill him without leaving my chair.
We've seen what you've learned to do, Belby replied. Your mastery of the Flowstone increases daily, but you lost a battle and a sizable part of your army with it. You show little understanding of how people should be governed, relying on naked force instead of statesmanship. In short, Krovax, your methods are inefficient. And as far as I'm concerned, the issue of who will succeed Borath is still unresolved. He sat back.
You constantly amaze me, Excellency. Of course, you're right. We'll see in the coming days who the best man is, won't we?